It is September 4th, 1943, on Westward Ho Beach in North Devon, and something extraordinary is about to unfold that would become one of the most absurd military experiments ever captured on film. The sand is damp, the afternoon light is gray, and assembled on this windswept stretch of English coastline are engineers, military officials, and cameramen waiting to witness what they believe could be a revolutionary solution to the most vexing problem facing the invasion planners in Whitehall. A soldier presses a button. The device before them, a peculiar contraption roughly the size of a garden roller, fitted with dozens of rockets protruding from its cylindrical body in a mad geometry of angles, suddenly erupts into violent motion. It tears across the beach in an explosion of sand and chaos, spinning wildly, hissing with the roar of burning rocket fuel, entirely unpredictable in its trajectory, and thoroughly beyond the control of anyone present. The assembled observers scramble backwards in genuine terror. This is the Panjandrum, and it is a disaster unfolding in real time. Yet someone, somewhere in the War Office, had thought this was a sensible idea. Not merely sensible, but essential. Not merely essential, but worth months of development, considerable expense, and the dedication of talented engineers. The Panjandrum represented an attempt to solve one of the Second World War's most pressing military puzzles: how to breach the formidable coastal defenses that Germany had constructed all along the Channel coast and the Atlantic Wall. It was a problem that kept strategists awake at night. The planned invasion of Normandy, then still 18 months away, would require getting soldiers and equipment past anti-tank obstacles, through minefields, and over defended beaches where enemy gunfire could cut down men by the hundreds. The answer, someone decided, was to create a massive wheel packed with explosives that could roll across the sand under its own power, powered by rockets, and demolish everything in its path. In retrospect, the idea appears almost comically absurd. But in 1943, with the stakes impossibly high and conventional solutions seemingly inadequate, the Panjandrum seemed to represent creative thinking at its most radical. The genesis of the Panjandrum lay in a genuine crisis of tactical thinking. By the middle years of the war, the Allies possessed overwhelming superiority in air power and increasingly in numbers, yet remained acutely vulnerable to fixed fortifications. The German coastal defenses were formidable: concrete obstacles, steel scaffolding, tightly wired anti-tank ditches, and machine gun positions sited with careful precision. Conventional demolition methods, soldiers carrying explosives, sappers with mine clearers, were terrifyingly slow and costly. The sapper training films of the period show men inching forward under fire, clearing mines one at a time, paying for every meter gained with blood. Planning for the invasion required some mechanism for rapid obstacle clearance. The problem was immense in scale and speed. Tanks could not cross these defenses. Infantry would be slaughtered in the attempt. Something needed to deliver a large quantity of explosive material quickly, under its own power, with minimal personnel exposure. The requirement was impossible, or seemed so. Existing technology offered nothing adequate. Conventional artillery was too slow and too inaccurate at short range. Sappers working by hand were far too vulnerable. What was needed was a mobile, self-propelled demolition system that could operate autonomously on a beach under enemy fire. Into this gap in capability stepped Neville Shute Norway, one of Britain's finest engineers and already an accomplished novelist, a man of genuine brilliance. Working with Stuart Halpin, a weapons designer at the Admiralty, they conceived of a peculiar solution. A cylindrical metal drum, approximately 6 feet in diameter and 5 feet in height, would be packed with explosives, roughly 2,000 pounds of TNT, and fitted with around 50 rocket tubes protruding from its sides. These rockets would fire simultaneously, and through the sheer thrust of their collective exhaust, they would propel the entire device forward across the beach at considerable speed. The rockets would be stabilized with small fins and would be angled slightly to encourage rotation, which would give the device gyroscopic stability whilst also producing, in theory, additional forward momentum. Once it achieved sufficient speed, the rotational forces would overcome any attempts to deflect it through enemy fire or obstacles. It would become a projectile of pure kinetic energy, driven by fire spinning into the German defenses like a metal meteor. The engineering involved was sound in its principles. The mathematics appeared to work. On paper, it was ingenious. Yet there existed a chasm between mathematical elegance and physical reality. The earliest tests conducted at a range near Southampton showed promise of sorts. The rockets ignited. The device moved forward. Yes, it was somewhat uncontrollable. Yes, it veered wildly off course. Yes, it became difficult to predict where it would actually go. But it moved, it accelerated, and it did eventually stop rather than running forever into the countryside. These partial successes encouraged further development. Refined versions were built. The design was iterated upon. The War Office, desperate for solutions, granted approval for full-scale trials. The secrecy surrounding the project was total. Even within the military hierarchy, few knew of the Panjandrum's existence. Documents were classified. The beach trials were conducted with armed sentries ensuring no civilians could witness proceedings. The program consumed money, time, and the efforts of good engineers who might have been usefully employed elsewhere. Everything depended now on demonstrating that the concept could work at realistic scale. Everything depended on the trials at Westward Ho. The footage of those trials is extraordinary. In grainy black-and-white film, we see the Panjandrum in its full, awful glory. Soldiers stand at a safe distance. Someone activates the firing mechanism. The rocket ignition is sudden and violent. The cylinders shake and begin to turn. Rockets burn with brilliant white flames against the gray beach. The device lurches forward, and within seconds the rotation becomes frantic, unstable, increasingly chaotic. The Panjandrum does not proceed in anything resembling a straight line. Instead, it veers suddenly to the left. Then it begins to turn more acutely. The cameraman, evidently sensing danger, backs away rapidly. The device is now spinning almost in place, rockets still firing, completely beyond any meaningful control. Sand is thrown everywhere. The roar must have been extraordinary, though the silent film conveys only the visual chaos. Then, as suddenly as it erupted into motion, the rockets burn out. The Panjandrum, still rotating, begins to slow. It settles into the sand. By any reasonable standard, the trial has been a catastrophic failure. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. We release documentary scripts about extraordinary engineering, forgotten weapons, and the brilliant people who created impossible solutions during history's greatest trial. Yet failure in military development can sometimes lead to refinement. The designers noted the problem. The rockets were not perfectly synchronized. Minor variations in ignition timing between each of the 50 tubes created asymmetrical thrust. This asymmetry was then amplified by the rotation, creating instability that quickly became uncontrollable. They proposed solutions, improve the ignition systems, better synchronization, perhaps reduce the number of rockets, perhaps enlarge the diameter to improve gyroscopic stability, perhaps angle the rockets differently. A second trial was arranged. This too was a failure, though the specific nature of the failure differed slightly from the first. Then a third. With each successive trial, the Panjandrum approached closer to genuine catastrophe. In one trial, the device achieved significant forward velocity before becoming unstable, at which point it began rolling sideways across the beach at considerable speed, still burning, still dangerous, moving toward a group of observers who had to flee. The cameramen caught all of it. The panic was genuine. The danger was absolutely real. The comparative analysis with German developments is instructive. The Wehrmacht had faced identical problems with the Atlantic Wall and had pursued orthodox solutions. They invested in improved concrete fortifications, in better anti-tank obstacles, in more sophisticated minefields. They engineered solutions that worked reliably and could be manufactured in quantity without elaborate experimental facilities. They had also, as it happened, developed their own experimental demolition devices, including various kinds of remotely detonated charges mounted on small vehicles. None of these were particularly revolutionary, but they were functional. The American approach to the same problem was similarly pragmatic. American engineers developed specialized tanks fitted with mine-clearing equipment and demolition charges. The duplex drive tank, the swimming tank, was itself a technological marvel, but its purpose was different. The Americans, in their way, were solving the problem through evolution of existing technology, incremental improvement, better integration. The British, by contrast, had sought revolutionary transformation. They had attempted to create something entirely new, something that would represent a qualitative leap beyond conventional engineering. The Panjandrum embodied that ambition perfectly, and it embodied the risks perfectly as well. By late 1943, even the most enthusiastic supporters of the Panjandrum program were beginning to acknowledge that something fundamental was wrong. Not with the engineering itself, which was competent, but with the underlying concept. The beach environment presented challenges that no laboratory could fully anticipate. Moisture in the sand affected rocket performance. Temperature variations altered the combustion characteristics of the propellant. The human factor, the fear and adrenaline of soldiers operating untested equipment, introduced variables that mathematics could not account for. The Panjandrum, in essence, was being asked to do something that contemporary technology simply could not do with reliability and control. It was ahead of its time, not in ambition, but in the engineering maturity required to realize it. Or perhaps, more honestly, it was simply the wrong approach to the problem. Not every problem yields to the most ingenious solution. Sometimes the answer is the obvious one. The Panjandrum never saw combat. No Panjandrum ever rolled across a beach under enemy fire. No enemy soldier ever witnessed this strange English invention as it approached their fortified position. In this sense, it failed. It failed its essential purpose, yet it would be too simple to dismiss the Panjandrum as merely a waste of resources. The project had absorbed talented people and consumed money that might have been deployed elsewhere. True, but it had also proven, through experimental process, that certain approaches to the problem were fundamentally unsound. It had generated data and experience. The trials themselves, ridiculous as they appeared, constituted a form of progress. What was learned from the Panjandrum's failure informed subsequent developments. The lessons were subtle but real. Rocket propulsion for amphibious vehicles required far greater control than the Panjandrum's designers had achieved. The problem of rapid beach obstacle clearance would ultimately be solved not through a single revolutionary device but through combinations of methods: specialized tanks, trained sappers, careful planning, and sheer determination. The legacy of the Panjandrum is therefore complex. Militarily, it achieved nothing. No fortification was destroyed by it. No beach was cleared by its passage. It altered no tactical situation. By every direct measure of military effectiveness, it was a complete failure. Yet it occupies a strange and important place in the history of military innovation. It represents an attempt, sincere and genuinely clever, to solve an apparently impossible problem through radical engineering. It shows what happens when brilliant people are given resources, freedom to innovate, and clear instructions to find a solution regardless of how unconventional that solution might be. The Panjandrum failed because the fundamental concept was flawed, not because the engineering was inadequate. That is actually a valuable lesson. The film survives, those extraordinary grainy black and white images of chaos and failure on an English beach. Museums preserve the concept drawings. A few fragments of construction remain. The Panjandrum exists today primarily as a symbol of the extraordinary desperation of 1943, when conventional methods seemed inadequate and anything appeared worth attempting if it might save lives in the coming invasion. It was wrong, and it failed, but it tried. We return now to that September afternoon at Westward Ho, to the moment after the rockets have burned out and the Panjandrum has come to rest in the sand. The cameraman is still filming. Soldiers emerge cautiously from whatever shelters they had fled to. The device sits there, smoking slightly, quite inert now, having accomplished nothing except its own violent and chaotic journey across 60 yards of beach. Someone will have to survey the data. Someone will have to write reports. Someone will have to explain to the War Office why the Panjandrum has failed. The problem of beach obstacle clearance will require different solutions. The actual invasion, when it comes, will rely on sappers, on specialized tanks, on careful planning, and on courage. The Panjandrum will fade into obscurity, known only to a handful of people with access to classified documents. For decades, it will be forgotten entirely, classified away in archives, too strange to be true, too real to be believed. Only much later will the film emerge. Only much later will the world understand that Britain, in the depths of war, had built this extraordinary machine and watched it fail in the most spectacular fashion possible. The Panjandrum was absurd. The Panjandrum was brilliant. The Panjandrum was entirely impractical. And the Panjandrum was built anyway, because sometimes when the stakes are high enough and the conventional methods seem inadequate, even the most unconventional ideas deserve their chance.